Blackburn from Tennessee, and leading the conversation is the Atlantic's deputy editor, Jillian White.
Thank you. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. I know you had a little bit of a rush over here after the vote.
Yes, we were in the middle of votes, so you know, sometimes we women work a little faster than some of the men up there on the hill, and so I was having to kind of prod them along a little bit.
Keep it moving. I understand it.
I said I made a commitment.
Well,
said,
we
and it's
appreciate
you know,
it.
it's a woman thing. You make that commitment, you're going to keep that commitment.
So I want to start off our conversation with a little bit of news. So
Sure.
In the past 3 years, there have been lots of questions about foreign interference in American elections, and recently this has bubbled up again with the question of the Ukraine's involvement in potentially checking out Joe Biden ahead of the 2020 election. You have been vocal about this topic. I'm wondering, can you tell us what you think should be done?
Well, my hope is that we'll get a transcript, we'll see what was said there, and that there will also be a review of what Mr. Biden did and what may have transpired there. I think that that's something that people would like to know, and would like to know what activity actually ensued.
So do you think this is something that merits some level of investigation?
I think that probably the committees in the House and the Senate, the appropriate committees, will look at it in the appropriate vein, and we'll find something out as to whether there's something to it or there's not.
Yeah. Some of your colleagues in the Senate, in Congress, have talked about moving ahead with impeachment as a means to settle many questions all at once. I'm wondering what your view is on that.
You know, the House continues to talk about moving forward with impeachment. That would be a question for Speaker Pelosi.
Who we will be talking to later. So I'm wondering, we've seen more women, a record number of women who have joined Congress, you among them. A lot of that growth has been on the Democratic side. I'm wondering why you think that is.
You know, it's always so interesting to me, and every time one of the universities who's doing a survey or one of the groups says, hey, we want to talk about this, I say, absolutely, let's talk about this. And with conservative women, myself included, I think that what they have a tendency to do is to have a more circuitous route in their life. They don't grow up and go to school and think I'm going to run for elective office. They kind of come to it because of an activity or later in life. And many times you will have women say, I would love to be in elective office, however, I don't want to cause my family any financial hardship, or I don't want to cause my family any undue stress. And so that weighs into their decision. And when you look at the fundraising totals, campaigns are incredibly expensive. And you look at the fundraising totals, conservative women raise less money than women that come from a liberal side of the aisle. And until you begin to see some parity in that, I think it's going to be more difficult. Being someone who has been at the state and federal level, and someone who has pushed breaking those glass ceilings, if you will, I have always encouraged women to take the risk and to put their name on the ballot. It may be for a school board, it may be for a county commission seat, it may be for the state general assembly, or even for Congress or Senate. In Tennessee, I was the first female elected to the U.S. Senate. We have never had a female governor in Tennessee. And I just encourage them to take that risk and to work hard. And you know, all my career, I've been pushing aside those barriers, you know, going back to my days selling books door to door for the Southwestern Company to work my way through school. They didn't hire women.
Yeah.
And I had to convince them to hire me because I wanted greater opportunity.
I have two follow-up questions there. What do you think is behind the funding discrepancy on the Republican side?
I don't know. It just
Yeah.
seems to be more difficult for women to raise those dollars, and there's not an organized unit around female candidates like Emily's list is on the Democratic side, and that does make a difference. And you know, for women who are seeking to enter the public arena, I do think that sometimes the cost involved on the just the financial cost is something that weighs heavily into those decisions.
Yeah. To that point, I wonder how you think about when you talk to other conservative women about running. You mentioned the idea that a lot of people, you know, want to spend time with their families, do not want to put an undue burden on their families. A lot of the women who have had success recently on the Democratic side have been pretty young. Either don't yet have children or don't have large families, but they're young. They don't necessarily have a huge stash of cash anywhere. So I'm wondering if you think there's something to encouraging women to go ahead and push forward in their youth.
I think that there is a lot to be said for encouraging women to consider the possible. And as we are looking at the celebration for women's suffrage next year, this is an area where I'm putting a lot of my personal attention, and also I'm putting a good bit of my attention in my office, because the push for women's suffrage, I mean, I think this is just such a uniquely American story and such a story of success, because you look at the beginning, 1848, and in New York, Seneca Falls, and that is where the push for women's suffrage began. And then you look at what transpired 72 years later in Nashville, and think about the amount of time that it took the women that started the suffrage movement did not live to see the end of the suffrage movement. But they did such a great job of building out that vision of what could be, that they were able to sustain this long period of time. And I tell you the story around what happened in Nashville, and I love Elaine Weiss's book on the Women's Hour, and it talks about that summer in Nashville and the War of the Roses and that push for women's suffrage. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about what went into opening those doors for women and how important it is for to encourage women to get involved.
Right.
And to be a part of that process and to choose to run, to make that choice to run. So hopefully we'll see more step up.
I want to talk a little bit more about your own election. So you're very successful among voters over the age of 45, but had a little more trouble with voters under the age of 45. I'm wondering how you think about appealing to a younger demographic and why you think there was that split.
One of the things is that when you look at our race and how the race worked out, we won the female vote. And that is important in our state. And when you say, where were you more successful? With women who are moms and who are working and juggling and balancing, there is an expectation that I would be more successful with that demographic. But it means that every day we have to work to get our message out and to have voters who are younger familiarized with the work that we're doing, and we put a tremendous amount of effort on working with digital media. And you know, Jillian, and I know you all look at this, and you in your work look at this, the way people receive their news now has changed so tremendously. And no longer do they watch cable news all day, or no longer do they watch network news at 6 and 10 or 6 and 11. And what they do is to pull together their own network and reliance on different websites. And so for all of us in elective office, male and female, I encourage everyone to begin to look at how individuals receive that. And certainly we know when you get to 2021-22, the expectation is that digital is going to be the most important part of a communication strategy.
I want to talk about that younger sect. You know, Taylor Swift, who is famously quiet on politics, came out in opposition to your candidacy. I'm wondering if you think that there is a fundamental difference between younger women who are apolitical and conservative and older women who would consider themselves apolitical and conservative.
I don't think that there is a fundamental difference. One of the things that I find is that women, I call them security moms. They're very concerned about our nation's security. They're concerned about their children's security. They want to talk about job security. Indeed, they want to talk about retirement security. Think about the number of women that you know that are helping to take care of an elderly relative. And it is astounding. Everyone has that type interface in their lives. And so they're wanting to make sure that things are secure and stable. And as I always say, let's just have calm, you know. Sometimes calm is a really good thing. And I think that by and large, that a lot of women want that predictability and that calm.
So on the topic of security, you mentioned the country's security. You penned an op-ed where you called a group of migrants who are moving towards the U.S. an invading force. In a few mass shootings after that, the shooters kind of leaned on similar ideology. I'm wondering if you found that startling.
One of the things I think is important for us to do is to make certain that we protect our nation's sovereignty and that we secure our southern border. And as you may know, and many of you may know, I've been very active in fighting against sex trafficking and the online sex trafficking that is transpired and protecting women and children in that vein. And the cartels work in two different components. One is trafficking drugs and the other is trafficking human beings. And to me, it is just such an incredibly sad situation when you hear some of the stories that are out there from individuals who have been trafficked. And there are groups and organizations. In Tennessee, we have a group called In Slavery Tennessee. And I've done a good bit of work with them. And even last year when I was in the House, had In Slavery Tennessee and the TBI up, because the largest online sex trafficking sting that had been carried out and conducted was done in Tennessee. And the TBI and In Slavery Tennessee had worked together on that sting, and they carried it out in Williamson County in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is home to office parks and has a large corporate community. And it is something that we see across this nation, and it is imperative that we work around, that we get a handle on this and that we end that kind of trafficking.
Do you think the current administration's border policy, including family detention, is serving that purpose?
One of the things that we know this administration is trying to do is to secure this border and provide a safe environment for these children. I've been going to the border for about 10 years, and we continue As a matter of fact, in 2014, I had raised concerns over the policies that were being put in place by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And I heightened those concerns with the way the detention facilities were set up for the unaccompanied alien children that were coming in. Now, it took me a while to get bipartisan work on that, but I never give up. And finally, last year, when we were passing something out of Energy and Commerce and dealing with Health and Human Services, we were able to get bipartisan agreement. And I think it's important that we make certain those children that are brought to our care are being properly cared for. It's one of the reasons that I just recently introduced legislation that will require individuals who come to our border for entry into our country, and they have a child with them, but they do not have proper documentation to show that that is their child, that they take a DNA test. The test only takes 90 minutes. It is a $200 test, but what it would do is allow us to know if that child is indeed related to that individual, or if it is someone that has been placed with that individual. And it will help us to protect some of those children and to make certain that they are returned to their families.
You talked a little bit about the facilities in which children are held and your concerns about them being safe. In the past few months, past year or so, there have been images, videos, audio that came out of some of those facilities that a lot of people found disturbing and concerning. I'm wondering if you also find them disturbing and concerning. And
I've been to the border twice this summer. Once I was on the trip with the Vice President, and you know, the facilities that people are coming to are not built for large numbers of people, and that indeed is a problem. I know that the Border Patrol and Customs and Immigration Enforcement are working to provide the best they possibly can for individuals that are coming there. When you see all of the goods and services that are made available, you know that they are working diligently to solve this issue. And Border Patrol continues to tell us that they need help on the border with a barrier. They need technology, they need more officers and agents, they need more judges to handle those cases. Yeah, and you know, getting judges that can help with the cases is something that's vitally important. When you take a state like Tennessee, and Memphis is where the office is for our region of the country, they have a case backlog of 20,000 cases. And they desperately need more judges, and they need more funding to address the issue.
I want to let our audience know we will come to you for questions in just about 1 or 2 minutes. I have about 2 more questions of my own. If you could start thinking about those questions now, whittling them all the way down, making sure that they are questions and not comments, I would greatly appreciate it. So we've talked about a few things that could be considered pretty divisive. I think a lot of the conversation that happens around Washington right now is very siloed into conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat. Are there, in your opinion, in your time in Senate, are there actual areas of bipartisanship right now?
Oh, yeah, I will tell you that there are. And I had actually, when you sent the questions over, you know, talking about how it was to be in the Senate so far and be the first female elected and what the differences are in the House and the Senate, and I looked at the things that I've done in a bipartisan way, because I think that is so important to do. The Ripon Society actually gave me the Bipartisan Leadership Award 2 years ago, and when I was in the House and serving as chairman of Comms and Tech, the subcommittee there at Energy and Commerce, one of the things that I really focused on was making certain that the changes that we were going to make to telecommunications policy and communications law, technology law, would be things where there was bipartisan agreement. if you want to get changes that are going to last, you're going to have bipartisan support to make those last. And I am, along with Senator Feinstein, chairing and leading the Technology Task Force at the Judiciary Committee. And Senator Coons and Senator Blumenthal are also very involved, but this is going to be completely bipartisan. We're looking at privacy, data security, competition, antitrust. I'm looking forward to that. We actually have a subcommittee hearing today, and then of course our task force has been working on these issues and hearing from the industry, hearing from stakeholders, hearing from consumers, and it is time for our nation to put something on the books that would be a basic privacy standard, because people have that expectation. We've also, Senator Tester and I have done a couple of things. We've got the Hello Girls. We have some legislation honoring them. He and I are also working on 2 or 3 veterans issues where either he has been the lead sponsor and I'm the lead Republican co-sponsor. We've got one bill, Senator Gillibrand and I have a bill, and this is a coin for women's suffrage. And it went through the Senate with unanimous support. And we thought it was great. You know, 100 years later, New York has a female senator in Tennessee. The start and the finish of the suffrage movement have female senators, and so this is over in the House. It's waiting to move forward. So call your congressman, tell them to co-sponsor this bill, and let's get a coin that is going to honor women and honor the women's suffrage movement, and have that.
I have one more speedy question, then we're going to go to the audience.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Judiciary Committee. Last time, the Judiciary Committee was really kind of in the news, being bugged and followed by people like me. It was during the Kavanaugh hearings. There was not a Republican woman on the committee then. I'm wondering if something like that came before the committee again, would you handle things differently, or would you want things handled differently?
I'm one of these that even as I went through the state Senate and through Congress, I made a point of doing my homework and reading the bills. And yes, indeed, we're in the personnel business in the Senate. That is one of the differences between the Senate and the House, and we do spend a lot of time on the executive calendar. But at the Judiciary Committee also, not only are we working on some of the immigration issues, but also the tech issues and the technology issues. And I will tell you, that is one of the areas where people contact to us the most, because they want us to do a data security legislation. They want us to do something with privacy so that people can protect themselves online, so that we have a federal standard for those areas. And I think we're going to see some movement on this year, and I think you'll see it in a bipartisan basis.